Our second speaker for this panel, Dan Shively, has been a fisheries biologist with the federal government for 26 years, much of that in the Pacific Northwest before coming to Washington in his current position, which he is celebrating a year, right? June 2015. He oversees the Fisheries and Aquatic Ecology Program for the U.S. Forest Service, spanning over 193 million acres of national forests and grasslands, including over 200,000 miles of fishable rivers and streams and several million acres of fishable lakes and reservoirs. The programs he oversees are oriented to protect, conserve, and restore the nation's freshwater habitat for fish and aquatic species, conservation on Forest Service lands, some of the best quality freshwater habitat remaining in the country. Dan pursued his interests and passion through fisheries science and watershed studies at Oregon State University, which led to a lifelong career protecting and conserving the nation's fisheries resources. In his spare time, he enjoys fishing, that's a shocker, and introducing newcomers to the wonderful world of fish. So, here comes Dan with Fish Your National Forests.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here today to talk about one of my favorite subjects. I have a small confession. I do like to fish. So before I begin, I need to find out how many of my like brothers and sisters are in the crowd. How many of you fish? How many of you have at least fished one time? There we go. I was looking for your hand. So that helps me out because my story here today is not just about trying to convince you to convince others to come fish your national forest, but to really spread that love. So before we begin, please close your eyes, if you will. Close your eyes. Tune out all the sounds, the squeaky chairs, the air conditioning noise. Just come to that place in your mind where you caught your first fish. All right, those of you with your eyes open, close your eyes, get into that zone. Think back, if you will, to the first time you caught a fish and what that experience was like for you. Let's open our eyes. Here's my story. You're on the Metolius River on the Deschutes National Forest in Central Oregon. This is a place we used to go and camp every summer. You're staring at Wizard Falls. For those of you that haven't been there, how could you not fall in love with this river? And in it are a native red band trout species that as a young boy lured me into this passion, this wonderful world that lives below the water surface. And I can remember fishing down below Bridge 99, dangling my worm in a hole and feeling that nibble and that excitement of hooking that fish and reeling it in, and just not just the pleasure of fishing and that enjoyment of the moment, but being one in nature on that river. And it wasn't until years and years later that that passion grew. And I'm going to argue that I'm amongst friends and colleagues here that every one of us has that passion. Whether you're an angler, whether you're an outdoor hiker, bird watcher, we've all had that experience, that moment that's connected us, that's led us to the jobs that we live out day by day, and the work that we do, and the passion that we share and inspire others to enjoy as well. And that's our calling here for Partners Outdoors. That's our calling for what's brought us to the profession that we're in today. That's our challenge for the future. That's our challenge whether we work for federal government, state government, non-governmental organizations, or industry. So keep that in mind. This river, that experience, years later led to my passion to pursue fisheries science, to the job I hold today, And I believe that that passion is critical in the work we do, and we've got a lot of work to convince others that have become disconnected from that opportunity. So I'll share with you another little secret to my story. It was just a few years back, my father made a confession. He said, Dan, we camped on the Metolius River during the summertime because that was a cheap form of recreation. He said, we weren't one of those families that took long trips or vacations to a destination resort. For us, this was our summer vacation. So think about that as the possibility for others. And I was truly fortunate because I had access to that opportunity. Not so many families do today, the families that we serve. So let me put a little context to this. That's my image these days, commuting to work here in D.C. And it's not an image that's all too unfamiliar to many of us. Traveling on a subway, a train, a bus, and many of us either with our earbuds in or looking at our smart phone or our mobile device. That's the world in which we live, and it's a very busy world, and it consumes us. And in doing that, we just wind up taking for granted this is the way of life. Roughly 83% of Americans live in or near a major urban center. And what's more startling is that the youth of America are growing more and more connected to their mobile devices. We've seen evidence of that earlier today, and we've seen nifty and innovative ways to use those devices and that technology to connect people to the outdoors. But here's some startling facts. The average age of a youth who gets his or her first smartphone is 10 years old. The average age of the American youth that establishes his or her first social media account is 11 years old. I can remember when my kids asked for their first cell phone. We didn't have smartphones really back then. It was just a flip phone. And so think about that, because that's the world that they're coming up into. And the hours that the children spend every week on a mobile device in front of the television is keeping them disconnected from the outdoors. It's our challenge to find ways to connect them, to erase those barriers, and to find the connections to get them exposed. And this isn't true just for youth growing up in urban centers. We have this assumption built in that the youth in rural America are connected to the outdoors, that they run and play outdoors in the woods, along streams and rivers, but they don't. They're just as much about doing this as their counterparts in major urban centers. So, as I mentioned, 83% of Americans live in or near a major urban center. These are the emerging mega regions of the United States. And by the year 2050, that number will grow to 90%. We're only becoming more and more urban and more disconnected by virtue of the lives that we live from the outdoors and nature. And so our challenge and our calling is to break down the barriers to access. We're blessed. Unlike many other nations in the world, we have large blocks of public land that protect and conserve our great natural resources of the United States and allow us access to those lands for public use and enjoyment. So the question I'll pose to you is, how can we effectively ensure the conservation and stewardship of these lands and the amazing wildlife and fish and water and natural resources they contain if we grow increasingly disconnected from the outdoors and that natural environment? So, what about fishing? What does this have to do with fishing? Fishing is a very popular outdoor recreational activity. Depending upon the source of data, it ranks number 2 nationwide, behind jogging and running. It's definitely within the top 3 and top 5 consistently. However, there's cause for concern in terms of the growth and the sustainability, and I'll get into the demographics here in a minute. What we know about fishing today in America, there are 46 million anglers, just like you, across America. That represents 15% of the population. There are 87 million boat owners, and we know that fishing from a boat is the most popular boating type activity, 27% of the population. This is a huge industry, all right? Almost 29 million licenses were sold nationwide, 2014, up 2%. So it's not a declining industry, but there is cause for concern when I take you through the demographics of that industry here in a moment. And it's a huge industry. It was pointed out earlier today, the overall outdoor recreation industry is huge. Fishing and boating alone account for $115 billion annually to our nation's economy, netting about 830,000 jobs. And that's huge, and that's great. And the cause for concern is that today's angling population, 65% of anglers are male, 39% are over 45, 77% are Caucasian. In the last 15 to 20 years, the average age of the American angler has been increasing. We're not recruiting new anglers. We are a little bit, but we need to be doing a better job of that. Of 45 million anglers in 2014, only about 6 million of those were new. For first-time license buyers, 70% did not buy a license the next year. We're not retaining anglers. Why is that? Is it too hard to buy a license? Was it a one-and-done activity? If you project that out over time, that leads to some pretty scary conclusions if you're in the recreational sport fishing industry. So let's talk about America's emerging angling population. As I mentioned, there are some shifts. We're beginning to see more women entering the sport. We're beginning to see a diverse group of youth engaging in the activity. We're beginning to see families, multi-generational families, participating in the activity. I was on the Kenai River 3 years ago. It was like going to the movie night with mom, dad, the children, the grandparents, all coming out to fish reds on the Kenai River. I thought that was pretty cool. It was like a movie night. And that was their form of Friday night recreation. So today, the majority of children 5 years and younger are non-Caucasian. How are we reaching out to this future generation of anglers? Research shows that most people who take up fishing as an avid activity in their lifetimes were exposed repeatedly to fishing before the age of 10, much like I was on the Metolius River in Oregon. The number of women and non-Caucasian participants in the sport is growing, and it's evidenced here. We're seeing positive signs and signals, but we need to do more in terms of recruiting, outreach, growing awareness, and retaining these future anglers of America. That with that passion for the sport comes with it a sense of stewardship for the resource and ensuring the longevity, protection of these resources well into the future. I want to share with you a story. It's really inspiring. 11-year-old Maxine McCormick, last August in San Francisco, California, entered her first ever casting competition. This was the U.S. National Casting Competition held every year. It brings out the best casters that we've known. Many of them have held these casting titles for year after year after year. She came in fourth in this national competition and rocked the fly casting world, leaving behind her many of her middle-aged male competitors. 11-year-old Maxine McCormick from San Francisco, California. That's the new angling population of the future, folks. The Forest Service offers tremendous fishing opportunities. 193 million acres of real estate, public lands, 220,000 miles of fishable streams and rivers, over 10 million acres of lakes and reservoirs, some of the best remaining habitat across the country. Many of these areas harbor some of the residual important populations of freshwater fishes that we manage in this country. And they provide a tremendous amount of recreational angling opportunity. Based on our National Forest visitor use data from 2008 to 2012, we estimate about 19.3 million angler visits each year on national forests. Approximately 60% of these visits, the primary purpose of which was for fishing. A huge amount of recreational fishing activity takes place on the national forest. I invite you to think about ways that we can improve those numbers, increase that participation. The Forest Service doesn't do this alone by any means. We partner with many organizations and host annual fishing clinics, fishing events for youth, for their parents across the country, on the national forest, at the ranger stations. In 2015 alone, we held well over 300 of these events nationwide. We did that in partnership with the states, other federal agencies, local communities, non-governmental organizations, tribal governments, and we reached over 54,000 youth. We partnered with over 220 different partners, and we leveraged over $4 million of in-kind and cash contributions. And these numbers, while they sound impressive, are actually underreported. Many of our units didn't fully report all their activities. We're hoping in 2016 to really emphasize to our forests that they do a full accounting of all of our activities in recreational fishing. The point being here is that the Forest Service has a huge outreach in partnership with many of you and others to reach future anglers in America. And we offer all kinds of opportunities for youth to catch fish. So come out and fish your national forest, enjoy the great outdoors, catch a 35-pound catfish in the South. Come out and fish your national forest and reconnect with nature. Show us how to land a smallmouth bass on a lightweight fly rod. Fish your national forest. Spend good times with family and friends. You see here a nice trout being caught by this young daughter with her father, leading to a lasting memory. Come out and fish your national forest. Create a new tradition. Create these lasting memories that grow into unforeseen promises. That's my invitation to all of you. And as we think about the future, I offer that call to action. We're beginning to reinvigorate our recreational component of our fisheries program in the Forest Service, working with colleagues across all of our program areas. And this isn't just within our National Forest System branch of the Forest Service. This is working with state, private, across all lands. And we're not going to do this alone. We're going to do it with our federal agency partners, states, tribal governments, non-governmental organizations like the American Sport Fishing Association, the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, the Future Anglers Foundation. There are many groups out there. And finding that common interest and commonality to really build that national vision. The Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, for those of you that don't know, launched this spring a 60 and 60 campaign aimed at taking today's 46 million anglers and growing it to 60 million in 60 months. I invite you to find ways to help us reach that goal in partnership with RBFF and others. They're going to do that through what they call a 3R approach. Recruit new anglers, retain existing anglers, and reactivate those anglers that need to come back into the sport. So maintaining our relevancy in the work that we do, whether you're governmental or non-governmental, is really key to serving our constituency amongst the American people. And how we do that through fishing or other means speaks to our vital interests and our imperative. The National Forest System is open for business. It's open for fishing. I invite you to come out and enjoy. And there's really no better way to acknowledge that than to announce this Saturday's opening day of National Fishing and Boating Week with the Urban Kids Fishing Derby DC right here on the National Mall, 5 minutes away. We're partnering with Urban American Outdoors, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and others to bring out over 300 youth and introduce them to the sport of fishing. There will be many of these other events across the nation, and I invite you to allow us to think about ways in which we can apply technologies, innovations, strategies that folks have presented here earlier today into meeting that 60 and 60 goal. Together with the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, the U.S. Forest Service, and other participants in that endeavor. I want to close with a quote from Richard Louv, author of The Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And he says, "We have such a brief opportunity to pass on to our children our love for this earth and to tell our stories. There are the moments when the world is made whole, and in my children's memories, the adventures we've had together in nature will always exist and last forever." Thank you very much.